Our reading today comes again from Luke chapter 12, following on from last week's reading. So chapter 12 that begins with Jesus speaking to crowds of thousands of people, but here talking to the disciples about the nature of discipleship. And two main ideas. The first thing being that people need to be aware of the great gift of grace that God has given them. And secondly, that they need to be, therefore, always alert and attentive and aware of the situations around them for ways in which they can use that knowledge and that assurance and that peace and that grace. And last week we had the reading, the first part of 3, about an imminent crisis. The first was for all people everywhere, you and I, to be aware of the need to take our faith out and use it in every situation possible and available. So today, the second and the third part of that reading from Luke's Gospel, the imminent crisis for Jesus and the imminent crisis for Israel. So this is Luke chapter 12, verses 49 to 56. Jesus says to the disciples, "I came to set the earth on fire, and how I wish it were already kindled. I have a baptism to receive, and how distressed I am until it is over. Do you suppose that I came to bring peace to the world? No, not peace, but division. From now on, a family of 5 will be divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. Fathers will be against their sons, and sons against their fathers. Mothers will be against their daughters, and daughters against their mothers. Mothers-in-law will be against their daughters-in-law, and daughters-in-law will be against their mothers-in-law." Jesus said also to the people, "When you see a cloud coming up in the west, at once you say that it is going to rain, and it does. And when you feel the south wind blowing, you say that it's going to get hot, and it does. Hypocrites! You can look at the sky and the earth and predict the weather. Why then don't you know the meaning of this present time?" So along with what we were saying last week in terms of Luke's theology of the fact that as far as Jesus is concerned, as per the words in Mark's Gospel, the right time has come and the kingdom of heaven is near, turn away from your sins and believe the good news. For Luke, the return of Jesus post-resurrection had already happened. It was real, it was now. Beginning, as we say in verse 32 last week, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father is pleased to give you the kingdom." God has already come, and through God's grace, we are shown love unconditional. We're told a fundamental, glorious truth, that the God who made all things loves us and holds us firm in God's arms and always, always will. And that this great peace and assurance and joy is already ours. It's been given to us. The only question then is, what are we going to do with it? What are we going to achieve through it? How are we going to use that great gift? Reminding us of all those wonderful parables about, the servants who were given a small amount of money and told to do something with it, and some did and some didn't. And it was all about taking it out, using it, creating more from what glory had already been given to us. That was the big push. And of course, last week, this idea about being watchful and attentive, because you never know when God is going to come back and say, "So, what did you do with that gift I gave you? How many people's lives did you improve? How much love did you show? How much care and compassion? How much prejudice did you speak out against? How many lives did you help to make whole?" This is the true nature of the Christian calling. It is to take that glorious news and do something with it, to actually live it as a real entity. So we missed out a section between the watchful servants and Jesus' imminent crisis, with Peter saying to Jesus, "Does this parable apply to us, or do you mean it for everyone?" And Jesus goes on to explain that, yes, it's everyone who's had that gift. In fact, everyone in the whole world, because we've all been enabled to have the ability to see God in our lives. We have God in our hearts already. It's just whether we come home during this lifetime and again what we do. Jesus talks about the crisis that's coming for him. I have a baptism to receive, and how distressed I am until it is over. A baptism reminding us of John the Baptist and setting that difference between Jesus and John. Interestingly, of course, John professed someone who was going to come and deliver that baptism for other people, be a scorching wind of fire, of judgment, if you like, upon everybody else. But Jesus, of course, here takes the word and applies it to himself. Nobody could have predicted that this great and wonderful Messiah would actually be the first to suffer the baptism of death because of living a life as God would like, of unconditional love for all people, causing so much hatred, envy, and dislike simply by being true and honest and righteous and loving. Who would have thought that those qualities would be the ones that would set the earth on fire? But that's what Jesus says. I came to set the earth on fire. And how I wish it were already kindled. Because after Jesus' resurrection, of course, people, as we are doing right now, will continue to ask the question, which the gospel writers try to solve, of course. Who was this man? And if the answer for you is Jesus was God in human form, then you're already there. If, of course, the answer is, well, I don't really care, well, then, of course, one has missed the opportunity to receive the grace that God so desperately wants to give us. The division that Jesus speaks about, or that Luke captures in these words, is, of course, because in the close-knit communities of the time, where, yes, mothers and sons and fathers and daughters and mothers and daughters-in-law, etc., would all be living together. I mean, we're not talking here about just having an uncomfortable Christmas together. They're actually living in the same house, working on the same land, perhaps. So division would be real every day, 24/7. And that division is over that single question. Who do you think this person was? Jesus. Who did you think? Because your answer to the question will provide so much division. For if you believe that Jesus was God in human form, just the greatest thing that's ever possibly happened, that puts you in stark contrast, of course, with those who don't. And also marks you out as different. Again, not because of your opinion, but because of how you're going to live your life, the things that you do, the priorities that you'll suddenly have. That will make you different from those who don't. It will make you different because you're living for the kingdom rather than for normal life. You're living for the values of God rather than selfish desires. Sorry, that sounds unfair in terms of selfish desires, but self-centered desires. So, not peace, but division. And it is simply that Jesus talks about. The reality of God's love will be divisive because people will either, at different ends of the spectrum, look upon it with glory and wonder and just fall down on their knees like Thomas in the upper room, my Lord and my God, and just be completely blown away by it. Or threatened, disinterested, unaware, bouncing off them. And this is the nature. God comes to us through God's grace to share that love, but it's down to us what we do with it. And that's the biggest decision any of us faces. If we read the gospel stories, if we understand what God has done, what are we doing with that? And he says, in terms of the wider audience, then returning to those thousands, about weather forecasting, that they can look at the things that happen on the earth and in the sky and predict even uncontrollable things like the weather, because that was the nature of that particular region. Well, look around you. The good news is being proclaimed. people are being healed, lives are being changed, love is being shown, glory is being celebrated. Everything is a new creation, as we hear about in the opening words of John's Gospel. The Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. Look around you and see what's happening. And if you don't understand those signs, then that's kind of crazy, isn't it? Then you're being blinkered. You are capable of reading the runes, of understanding the times and the signs, but you're choosing not to. And that choosing not to is an active choice. It is something that you do and say, I'm not going to engage with that. And you may kid yourself and think, well, it's bounced off you. But actually, that is the decision you made. If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. So again, completing the first story from last week, the idea is quite simple. Luke has assembled this material to simply say, look, good news is already here. God's love is already here for you. What are you going to do about it? It's as simple as that.